And you get a car.
So raffle is in a car.
All right, so we are going to be talking about social responsibility and social media, and let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Tom Murphy. Did I get that right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Director of Citizenship Communication for Microsoft Corporation. You might have heard of it. Tom is responsible for Microsoft's citizenship communications efforts. He moved to Seattle from Ireland, where he ran Microsoft's citizenship and public relations programs, and before that, spent many more years than he cares to remember running communications programs in Asia, Europe, and North America in a variety of agency and in-house roles. Next up, we have Joe Lawless, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Leadership and Social Responsibility, the Milgard School of Business for the University of Washington, Tacoma. Joe creates and runs programs designed to build socially responsible leaders who build sustainable organizations. He received his MBA from the University of Washington, focused on corporate social responsibility. Prior to UW, he was with Tacoma Goodwill as Director of Corporate Partnerships, and he spent 15 years as Executive Director for the Mary Bridge Children's Foundation. Henk Campher, right? Did I get it? He has lots more names, not just these two, so ask him later. He is the Senior Vice President of Business and Social Purpose at Edelman. Here's a quote: "Challenge conventional thinking, make a difference, and have fun." With over 18 years of experience, Henk is known for this approach as a challenging thought leader in the CSR and sustainability space. He has worked closely on strategy development and execution with some of the leading CSR companies, including Starbucks, Levi's, Best Buy, Tiffany, eBay, Abbott Labs, and Timberland. He was recently named as one of the top 100 thought leaders in trustworthy business behavior. So, welcome everybody. All right, so let's just dig right into the questions, shall we? Each of you brings different perspectives to how social media can be used for social responsibility communication. You all are from relatively diverse areas. Describe a recent project or initiative you have worked on that has leveraged social. What did you do? What channels did you use? Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Why did you pick those channels, and did it work? Anyone? Just go for it.
Take turns.
I'll go. The most boring thing that you can do in sustainability is do a sustainability report, right? It's really, it's painful. It takes 6 to 9 months to write, and then nobody reads it. So the challenge was, how do we get people interested in it? How do we use the launch of a boring report, like a financial report, to get people interested in it? So we went to social media. I'm a social media junkie. On Twitter, my name is Angry African. Long story about why it's angry. Should I move? Step away from my. So what we did was we decided, okay, we're going to have a key influencer amongst anybody that follows her. We're going to have their moderating panel. We're going to live stream this, but at the same time, we're going to have a live Twitter chat with the audiences so that they can just put questions out there. We just call what I call brutal transparency. You can't hide from any question on Twitter. So we did that. We had no idea what success was going to look like because no one has ever done that. So we couldn't define success, which is great, because whatever you do, you can then claim to be successful. But we did that, and we got over 600 of the key influencers we targeted. We got over 600 people to participate. We thought it was going to take maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes. We had to stop after an hour and a half and say, really, we're running out of time. People were really engaged, live streaming. Of course, we got the first question was the most difficult question. Now, Clyde had the perfect answer. I don't know. But that's, that for us was a breakthrough from using different technologies, getting that, and then we had an asset we can then continue to use. That, of course, we also had an op-ed writing behind that, media partnerships, etc. But using Twitter in that way, because we then created the hashtag we created as an asset that we continue to use to drive other discussions. we all of a sudden had those key influencers, not just have Liberty, involved in discussions. And the client who wasn't really involved in Twitter before, all of a sudden everybody knew her and she could get engaged in other forums as well. So that's from our side. We could declare it a success because we define it as a success afterwards. No one could argue.
Good learning. Good learning. So I look after PR and social media, most general comms for Citizenship at Microsoft. And so, bad news sells, and as my son tells me, good news smells, right? So it's very hard from a PR perspective. There's limited space for good news. And so we were thinking about our employee giving. Our employees give a lot of money and time through the year. Folks are giving it at Microsoft through the month of October, though it happens all 12 months around. But we have about 500 events taking place on our campuses all across the US during the month of October. But it proves quite difficult to actually tell that story through the media. So we created an internal news team who spent the month of October traveling all around our campuses, all around the country, trying to ferret out the really interesting stories. My favorite was the team, and I have to say this properly, particularly with my Irish accent, the flocking team, who, if you made a donation to a charity, would transform your colleague's office with pink flamingos of all shapes and sizes, but they had to be pink. And then if you donated, if the person whose office was flocked, if you made a bigger donation, they could pass the flocking on to someone else. And they also had an offering where they could have, for a bigger donation, you could have flock insurance to stop people flocking your office. And then you had what they called a flocking super service, where if you paid an incredible amount of money to a nonprofit, it overrided the insurance. And so these incredible stories took up a life of their own. And the other thing is, we're a very small department in a very big company. So part of our job is really getting others in the company to start telling these stories. And social is incredibly powerful for that. And I'm always amazed that my colleagues in business groups are always amazed at the reaction they get to CSR stories, and CSR social media tweets and Facebook posts. And actually the one on, so we use a giving campaign and then we announce the amount that was raised. And then we broke a new record this year. Our staff in the US raised about $100 million. And that was the most retweeted tweet the core Microsoft Twitter handle has ever put out. They were just astounded by it. So people do care about CSR and social responsibility, but it is difficult to get people to listen and get out there. I should also say that as an Irish person, I apologize. It's very unnerving to the last session before drinks start. Right. It is the graveyard shift in my world.
We're going to go.
Stay with us.
Very fast. I'll first of all apologize for my lack of an accent.
You have an accent, it's just not exotic.
Right, right, exactly. So I come at it from a bit of a different perspective. I was not a social media junkie until I went to Henk's office. And Henk talked me into some pieces of that. And I work within an academic environment and work with students who, needless to say, are very much into social media. So I have become a convert. And most of the ways that I use social media within the context of academia is to communicate with students, to get them to communicate with each other. Because students are bombarded with messages, millions literally a week, and they don't pay attention. Actually, when I teach governance to students, I always tell them that the number one rule in life is pay attention. And they're a very challenging audience to communicate with. So I use all Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn a lot to communicate with students, to get the messages of social responsibility, to get the speakers that we bring to campus, the events that we do, the opportunities for them to engage with the community, to get them talking about it, and have been relatively successful with that. I find that it doesn't work though without also having scales a little bit different than Microsoft on a global scale. without me also having some kind of personal interaction with them. So yes, social media works, but there's nothing better than running into a student in the hallway and talking to them personally and engaging them. They can still do that. They still have the capacity to speak periodically. I know. Not necessarily bright. I'm sorry, communicators, but students are losing their ability to write. I'm just being honest, brutally transparent. Isn't that what it's called, Henk? So I approach it from a little bit different perspective.
Well, it sounds like across the board, everyone thinks social media does work well. How does it work well with social responsibility communication, or maybe it doesn't? What makes it better than traditional media options, or it doesn't make it better than traditional media options?
So I'll take that one. So I'm old, so social media is something I'm learning, but have been for a long time. I'm a slow learner. I believe that social really needs to be integrated with the rest of the marketing function, and specifically public relations. Everything we do, we absolutely think about social. There are some things we just do in social, but the whole thing must be integrated. I also think when you're getting to social responsibility on social, you need to be very clear about what, and I'll call it CSR, or what corporate social responsibility is from a large corporation's perspective. Because where you get into trouble is starting to think that throwing a couple of $1,000 at a nonprofit and giving them a big cardboard check is CSR when it's really not. Or sending your employees in to clean a park. CSR is a lot more strategic, sustained commitment by a company. It's about driving business value, but understanding a company has a role in society, and it's a long-term investment. And I think one of the problems people get into is they kind of throw some money at a nonprofit, they get out there, and then they start getting criticized and don't understand why. So I think you have to lock the basis of what is the company's commitment, what's the approach, where are you making those investments, and then absolutely social media is incredible. I mean, I think social media has driven greater awareness and adoption of CSR possibly than any other trend in the last 10 years. Because people want more accountability, more transparency. From a company's perspective, as I said, it's difficult to tell news. There's a limit to the good news you can tell. But through social media, we get a huge opportunity to engage with people, to address concerns, address issues. So there's a huge opportunity, but it should be integrated, and it should be based on a really strategic, integrated plan that the company's committed to. Very boring answer.
No, but I agree with you. It's the same rules as normal communications. And anybody that's ever worked with me know that I usually walk into a room looking for a whiteboard, because then I'll draw you a picture of what I call the funnel. And you've seen the funnel, don't laugh. My team has now banned me from actually drawing the funnel. But I still do it. But the funnel explains how we approach communications. I mean, one rule that and you mentioned it earlier in your presentation, but we use it as anyone that we're trying to influence. You've got to get a message 3 times from 3 different places before they're actually going to believe it. Social media is key for us to actually reach our stakeholders. Before you can write a sustainability report or do sustainability communications, and people come to you. Nowadays, is how do you know people on where they find the information already? And that is whether they read certain blogs. And we've got a map that the company is not at the center of information. It's just part of the universe of information. So we've got to find the people we're trying to influence, where do they get in the information? Well, they get it traditional media, but mostly they get it. I look at myself, 2 apps. You're not in one of those 2 apps, I'm sorry, you're not part of my CSR circle. Twitter and Pulse. That's it. Pulse tells me, draws all the news I need from CSR into one app, and I can share that very easily on Twitter or on Facebook or anything else. And then Twitter itself, the people that I've built into the groups that I get information and that I share information from. So I don't read the New York Times anymore. If the New York Times doesn't allow me to be for them to be downloaded on Pulse, you dead to me. But it's so that's we've got to use those channels and see how do other influencers use that, and how do we channel our information and make it relevant. You can't pitch the same story to each one of those. It's about engagement. And when I explain my funnel, I say on the right-hand side of the funnel is the consumer, the mainstream. On the left-hand side is really the influencers, the deep thinkers, the thought leaders. We have to have a consistent story. We've got to think like Hollywood. Hollywood hasn't given us a new story in 100 and something odd years. Whether we're talking about Cinderella on mainstream or Brokeback Mountain on thought leaders, it's still the same story told in different ways for specific audiences. So that's how we've got to approach from the sustainability side as well. So how do we tailor and take it out to where people will actually find it?
Corporate social responsibility is really about values, about your organization's values, your collective values as an organization. And if there's not alignment between your values as an organization and what you're communicating to your stakeholders, social media, I think, is a very risky avenue to use because it's a two-way communication. It's a multi-way communication. And people are going to talk back and they're going to be talking about you. So using it to communicate corporate social responsibility messages, those messages you better make sure are in complete alignment with your organization's values and how you're acting on those values.
Great answer. To segue to the next question, it is quite a challenge in this space to use social media. There are so many more things you have to think about than if you were, say, using the Taco Bell handle or one of those accounts. What can be challenging, in your own words, in using social media for this type of communication?
You can't hide anything. You know, the biggest challenge is telling companies that they should be engaged. They think it's an option. I find it fascinating when companies think it's an option because the discussion's already taking place. Only choice the company has got is you're part of the conversation or you're not. You can't stop the conversation. Now that's not driven by you anymore. So that's one of the big challenges, is getting companies to understand that as with product, sustainability, CSR, that discussion is taking place. They're already talking to you. They're already talking about you, about these issues, and you can't control. You know, with media, this is the pitch, this is the Q&A, this is how we're going to deal with everything. Social media, lose control. It's rule number one. You can't control everything. Be part of the engagement. I think that's the biggest challenge that companies have got when we say brutal transparency. They go, yeah, we like that. Until we show them what it actually means to be brutally transparent. Is that, well, now you're going to face the audience and they can ask you any question, no matter who you are and where you are. That's the biggest challenge for them. But then if you look at companies who've been really successful in this, companies that have embraced the transparency. If you look at Starbucks, all honesty client, and I don't work with Starbucks right now, so not my client, Edelman client, but if you look at from the sustainability side, when they last year reported that they missed goals, everyone went, cool, they missed goals. Why? Because people are now so used to Starbucks being brutally honest and open that if we don't achieve the goals, we're going to tell you. And people then don't attack them because they didn't achieve the goals, actually engage them instead of attack. And if people attack them, they've now built a buffer for other people to come in and say, really, Starbucks isn't the problem. How do we become part of the solution? So they've got to get over that transparency issue for them to really benefit from social.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for social media that certainly a lot of people I talk to face is resourcing. Social's great and social is important, and we spend a lot of time and resources in social. But all the other stuff that we've been doing for 20 years hasn't gone away either. And so how do you make a decision regarding where you invest your time and resources? Because there was this whole fiction that went on about social media 10 years ago, how it was free. And all these tools are free. And absolutely all the tools are free, it's great, except that it uses the most expensive and rare resource you have, which is good people. And so making investment decisions about where you can afford, because once you're engaged, you have to engage. You can't just walk away from the audience. So that's one of the biggest challenges with social. The issues on social, actually, I don't worry about, because frankly, if you're being upfront and transparent and you're engaging with people on an ongoing basis, you'll get kudos for that, you'll get credit for that. And actually what we find, which is really interesting, is that a lot of times other people will jump in your defense without you having to even get involved, particularly if people are being completely wacky. And people are completely wacky on social media. You know, people completely have this hair trigger response all the time, where they never would have in the real world, and that's something you have to be aware of and deal with. But for me, it's how do you manage this integration of all these other things that you still have to do, are still important. Yes, we measure and we make decisions based on where we have the biggest impact, but it's still a very difficult decision. So.
I don't know that I have much to add to that. Yeah. Well, other than to say that I think the challenge with social media, specifically around communicating CSR, I go back to the alignment with your values and the challenge around transparency that Henk talks about. It's the one form of communication that is instantaneous, and it's the speed. I guess that's the biggest challenge, is the speed of it. You know, 20 years ago, when you had an issue going on within a company, it would take time for those messages to spread, even through traditional forms of media. Now it's instantaneous, and the messages that you don't have control over can change extremely quickly throughout the period of an hour. So I think that's the biggest challenge, which gets to the people thing, because that means you have to devote more resources to paying attention and being engaged in those conversations.
Fast world. Here's a question that you didn't get beforehand.
Awesome.
Here we go.
Any questions before the very transparent.
We're all about transparency here. So speaking about transparency, on social media, it seems we're all in agreement that transparency is essential on social media. Do you think every single business should have a strategy of complete transparency, or are there examples where maybe it's not the best idea?
I think some companies shouldn't be in social media in the first place. That's the honest truth. The reality is not every company is sustainable. That's you know, the judgment I make is the fact that this company exists, does it make the world a better place? Does it take us to a better place? If it takes us to a better place, or have the potential to take us to a better place, be sustainable, or you can become sustainable. There's a difference between being responsible and being sustainable. You can be very unsustainable. If you're an energy company, an oil company, or a coal company, you're not sustainable. That's reality. You can, however, be very responsible. You know, if you, the whole new buzzword is shared value. You know, well, if you're an arms manufacturer, I'm sorry, the end product is not a good thing. You know, but you can be responsible to a certain extent. You can't be sustainable. So I think companies have to be open and honest with themselves. That really, how transparent can I be? Because as a company, I'm not sustainable. You've got to find your own way of engagement. Like, who do you really want to engage online? But if you're going to engage, I used to run campaigns at Oxfam over in the UK. You all know Oxfam, because it's Irish. No, I didn't tell you. No, but you know, the rule for us was always, if there's dirt, we're going to find it. No, we will find it. It's amazing how resourceful activists are in finding information. No matter how much you hide it, it's not if it's going to get out, it's when. So be careful when you want to engage online, because if you're not willing to be completely open and transparent, you will get caught out. That's easy.
Yes, I agree. I think it's challenging for some companies to be totally transparent. You know, there's things that you don't want to be transparent about. I'm guessing that Microsoft's probably not transparent about, you know, the next product development that they have coming out. There's a couple of people, maybe their competitors, that they don't want to know about that. You know, so total transparency about everything, absolutely not. It's just a bad business decision. But if you're going to claim that you are responsible and sustainable, you'd better be able to back up those claims with transparency.
So, one of my bugbears is these words are thrown around about social media. There's a lot of hype around this stuff, and there's a lot of discussion, and everyone has to be transparent. And the nature of commerce is you're not going to be completely transparent about everything in your business, because that's why you're in business. And so I think we need to focus the conversation with what are the things we're going to be transparent about. And so there's a whole set of CSR, from a CSR perspective, there's a whole set of indices and data that companies can share through a thing called a GRI. And we absolutely do that. We go way beyond the standards of that. But of course, no company that has intellectual property is going to be completely transparent in every part of their business. And so I think we need to redefine what transparency is and make it a little bit more realistic. In the same way that everyone in this room isn't going to be completely transparent about their personal lives just because you're on social media. It's not expected. Some of you maybe are. I don't want to know. But you're not going to be completely transparent about everything, but there are important shared values that people have and metrics companies should be measured with, both in an ideal world and obviously legally. And absolutely companies need to adhere to that, and there needs to be openness about that. But words are bandied around about social media accountability and sustainability. One of the issues with social media is this attention deficit disorder. One of the reasons we need journalism to survive is investigative journalism does things social media rarely does. And yes, there are examples where social media does drive to the answer, but most times it's a quick tweet, it's a retweet, it's a Facebook post and move on. And so, yes, transparency is incredibly important. Companies need to get involved in the conversation. They need to be accountable. But, it's a very broad word. I think the real transparency is probably more limited.
I think it's an important point. It's from what is most material to your company. And if you look at it from the GRI side, they'll tell you these are the things you have to report on. You'll filter through how important it is to your business and to your stakeholders. If something is important to your stakeholders and your business, that's going to be open. How deep you go, it's only if you're hiding something, rather put it that way. You're not going to, no one really wants to read about every single measurement of emissions and energy use. Like I went to that plug and put that, not that level of transparency. But then I think a lot of companies focus on the stuff that's not really that important to the company, future, or to its stakeholders, but they tell the world about it. Well, who's interested in that? I'll give you an example. Hopefully the client's name wasn't there. I worked with a pharmaceutical company before, and they spend a lot of money on art, and they always told the world about it, and I go, really? Come on, you're a pharmaceutical company. It's not important to your business, it's not important to your core stakeholders. Why focus your communications of citizenship around that? It's not material to the company. So agree with you that transparency is what is important to the company. If you're hiding anything, or if you're telling something to hide something, that's the danger. Don't say something if you're not willing to back that up.
Great answers. Yes, social media is very complicated for sure, and especially in this space, I think it's a little bit more of a challenge than in other areas. Can you give some examples? We've talked a lot about people doing a great job with transparency, good examples such as that, but can you give any specific examples of any companies or organizations that you think have really nailed it, and how have they nailed it?
I was going to say Microsoft.
Besides Microsoft.
Who I've seen who's done it well is actually comes out of the nonprofit sector, and it's Lance Armstrong and his foundation. They engage their stakeholders extremely well, and they tell their story well. They engage them from an activist standpoint well. They raise funds from them. They do an extremely good job of engaging their communities in conversation about attacking cancer.
Like on Facebook, Twitter, or on their community sites?
Yes.
One that I'm watching with a lot of interest is Unilever. So Unilever have launched Sustainable Living. It's kind of a campaign that's been running for about 6 months now, and they're really beginning to pick it up. And what I think is really interesting from a social responsibility perspective is, one, It's completely integrated across their business. So it's strategically something they're adopting from a sales and marketing perspective, but from a corporate perspective. They recently did a 24-hour non-stop sustainability webinar going around the world with loads of experts and stuff. And I think they're betting their company that they can make sustainable living a core value of their company, and more importantly, where they've identified important to consumers in their purchase decisions. So I think that's a really, really interesting one. One company I've always admired an awful lot in terms of the tone of their communication from a socially responsible perspective is a company called Innocent Smoothies. They're an English company that have done smoothies and health drinks and everything else. And you should go to innocentdrinks.co.uk. The tone is incredible. It's just a delight. It's like meeting someone in a bar or in a restaurant and them talking to you rather than the usual corporate language. And they've just done an incredible job. They actually got bought, I think, by Coke last year. But if you want an example of how to talk to consumers about a subject where I find a lot of the health companies or the healthy food companies, they're kind of preaching to you and you feel a bit guilty, you know, blah, blah, blah. These guys take the complete opposite view, complete opposite approach. It's warm, it's accessible. Their packaging is so smart. So you could be drinking their smoothie in a carton for 6 months, and then one day you'll, for some reason, look at the bottom of the carton and you'll see that they have printed on the bottom of every carton, "Why are you looking at my bottle?" It's just surprising, it's engaging, it's warm. So have a look at our site in terms of messaging, and I think the Unilever one is going to be a really interesting example of kind of company, because there have been some pretty well-known flame-outs where people have kind of gone to cause marketing, put all their money into it, and the results have been mixed. So I think that'd be really interesting.
I was going to say Unilever as well, but I think if you break it down into, well, in all honesty, I don't think any company's ever done social media from a CSR sustainability perspective as a total way. You know, they haven't integrated it well. They've used bits and pieces very well. You know, for example, Unilever, their sustainability site and how they really get people engaged through that, that's awesome. It's probably the single best site out there at the moment. The Starbucks report of 2 years ago was really good from how to get people sucked into information. Timberland, as a CEO, the previous CEO before they sold the company, he was really active as a CEO leader on Twitter, Starbucks and Facebook. So there are companies that's done certain parts really, really well. I would say that I've yet to see companies that convince me that they've integrated it into the sustainability totally. They still see it as different tactics. They don't always see how these things can play together. If we go down the NGO route, but they talk to themselves, that's the only challenge is Greenpeace. Greenpeace does some really interesting work in how they, and I'm surprised because the internet really was, as we see it today, was started by and used for engagement by an NGO, and then they really lost it for a few years, and in the last while, Greenpeace has used different tactics, but where I struggle with them is they're really only talking to themselves. They're talking to the inside group, and they don't see it becoming mainstream and how they're using it. Companies are still, I think, better using single tactics, but I think the challenge comes with that integration, and I think the reason for that is what you mentioned earlier. You can't do everything. Now, what's the resources really needed, and Pinterest today, and what's next in the next 6 months?
Something to think about, and I've worked with a lot of different companies. This is also a surprise question. How do you?
They're all surprised.
How do you determine the appropriate voice for a brand? Because you wouldn't necessarily use the same kind of voice with, you know, Lance Armstrong's foundation as you would, say, REI or something maybe a little bit more serious. How do you determine this is the appropriate voice we want to take through our social media channels?
The brand's sustainability voice, CSR voice cannot be any different from the brand. It's got to be part of the brand. It's got to be, if you're a fun brand, it's got to be fun. I mean, I get bored by the seriousness of sustainability. Like you said, my rule number one, anybody that's ever worked with me, my rule number one in life is to have fun. If you're not having fun, don't do it. You know, do something else. It's much more fun to sit in a hammock, that's my real goal in life, than to actually do work. What if I can lie really still, it will be sustainable. But you know, so I think that's got to be so true. And that's where a lot of sustainability communications and engagement gets lost. They become so serious. They use words like sustainability. The minute you say sustainability, we're talking about it really. My sister-in-law still thinks I work in HR. I've never worked in HR because how do you explain to her what I do? One client I'll use as an example is Best Buy. Work with Best Buy. If you see their corporate videos, you will think you're watching Monty Python. It's the funniest corporate videos I've ever seen in my life. The internal launch of the report, everything. We started working with them and said, really people, that's the voice you should be using in the outside world. There's such a disconnect that people don't know who you are as a brand. So hopefully with the next CSR report that you're going to see, and I've just edited, you might actually see a reference to the Incredible Hulk. Because when I edited it, I saw green power and I go, come on, how can you not think of Incredible Hulk? You just see somebody use the word green power, but make it funny, make it your corporate voice. Because you've got to, CSR sustainability communications is no different from any other communication. Be true to the brand.
Well, he said it. It's really about authenticity.
I do agree, but it can be quite complex as well. If you're working with different audiences or different expectations of how you're going to communicate with them, everything can't be fun, rad, happy, cool, awesome. Some of it's got to be pretty terse communication because that's how it's expected and that's the format. I think there's absolutely a much better opportunity for us to speak in real English, and that's where the innocent smoothie thing comes up. But that's for an audience communicating a certain type of thing. I don't think you can just roll that out across all your comms. So it's not, it's still work involved.
I think if it's basically reactive, you can't be, and there's certain topics that you can't be as fun about. But if you think of from a proactive, how do I tell my story more broadly speaking, that's where you've got to be true to the brand. The challenge comes in when you, from the corporate side, have different brands. Because most companies don't have an identity from the corporate side to say this is who we are as a brand, because it's their actual brands that talks more. So there are those challenges.
Are we on time? All right? 10 minutes? All right. What's up? Yes, that was next. All right. Does anybody have a question out there? I know you're thinking.
I have to take Shelby's mic. Hi. I worked on the Global Responsibility Report, and I proudly posted on Facebook when that launched. But I was wondering what you use to advance your personal brand, the causes that are important to you through your own channels in social media. I know Angry African is one of them, but how can you really tell the story of the things you're working on that you care about, and also personally, in a professional way, of course, that your boss will see in those channels?
Now, for me, it is the Angry African came from a blog called angryafrican.net because I wrote a tongue-in-cheek piece about, I saw an ad for kind of a financial company down in Boston, a tiger chasing a Maasai warrior. Really, we don't have tigers in Africa. So I wrote a piece called Communications 101. We don't have tigers in Africa, just get your story straight. And Tivana's got an African tea with an Indian elephant on it. Little things like that. So somebody said, you're a real Angry African in the news. I go, yeah, that's my handle. But with that comes a responsibility. You've always got to be brutally transparent about who you are. If you say that, if you mention a client, you've got to say client, because else you'll be caught out. And you've got to be just true to yourself. You've got to know, people's got to know who you are as you as a brand. And with my brand, it is I'm going to say whatever I want to say, no matter where I am, no matter who it is. Because that also actually helps with selling the clients. Clients know exactly who they're getting. Of course, it's different with different channels. Facebook, for example, is personal. It's friends because they're all over the world. Twitter is open to anyone. Blogs, open to anyone. So you've got to find your own unique voice in that. And it's difficult to disconnect. You've always got to make sure that whoever employs you are happy with whatever voice you're going to have. I'm lucky with Edelman. It's a case of just go do what you want to do. Don't insult our clients, please. Stay above, don't look at the bottom, those kind of things. So, be clean. But apart from that, we are an agency, client, and I work with sustainability. Clients expect me to have an opinion. And so that's part of the brand. It's different if you're not with an agency. consultants. That's got to still be true. And part of why we do it is we've got to test drive all this stuff. Right? Pinterest's got to figure out how does that work. Different app. You've got to test drive and see how you can play it before you can actually advise clients.
I learned a lesson about this about 4 years ago. I was speaking at a conference, and I was on Twitter, but I was kind of making fun of it. I was, this whole thing, I'm going for a coffee, my coffee was lovely, blah, blah, blah. And I hadn't really got what Twitter was about, which I have now, just for the record. And I made some joke at the expense of some people on Twitter, and I gave my talk about an hour, and I got down, and someone said, whoa, there's all kinds of furore broken out over Twitter. And so some people were Twittering in the audience, took complete offense to what I said, didn't get the joke. And within about 15 minutes, it had gone from a guy speaking at a conference makes a joke about Twitter to Microsoft executive slams Twitter. And then into, of course he did, oh, Microsoft don't get it, blah, blah, blah. I learned a very important lesson. I'm the same. Facebook is completely personal. I say who I am, but I do not talk work there. Twitter's personal and work, probably more work than that. I have a blog, which is more about PR and everything else. But I put a lot of thought. I delete probably 75% of the blog posts I'm about to write because, I am a Microsoft person, therefore that's going to come back to me. And on Twitter, I'm very careful about what I put out. I do find with people who have a kind of mixed identity between where they work and where they tweet, that a lot of time they're just selling their company's wares all the time, and I just don't get the value of that. I think you really need to put some thought into what is your online personality, and yes, it's part of your employer and it's part of you. But I would make some very careful decisions. I mean, the stories of the kids who go on Facebook, call in sick, and there's pictures on their Facebook and they're in a barber chair getting vodka thrown down their neck. It's happening all the time. And this stuff doesn't go away. So be very careful and thoughtful about what you do online and what your personalities are, what's work, what's personal, what's mixed, and just look.
I think some of the same principles apply in terms of authenticity to your values, which is what I try to practice because the main audience for who I communicate with is students. And I try to set an example for them of staying true to my values but taking a position and demonstrating for them that we can have a discussion, we can have an argument and take different positions. But as long as our position doesn't matter as much as our orientation. That if we take a position and we're on opposite ends of the spectrum and we're both facing out, we aren't going to be able to have a conversation about it. But if we both take a position, even though they're very different positions, but we're facing in, we can talk about it and defend our positions and do that in an ethical way. So I try to demonstrate that for students to show them that they can have differences of opinion and have conversations with each other. Because they do come from a very, very broad spectrum of positions and opinions. So,
on that last topic about how the brand and the voice, given how many different social medias there are, can you talk a little bit about how you strategize about the voice that comes through to those different audiences, the voice? How do you manage that with the different resources that you have? Because it's not one person controlling that, or even one department in a lot of large organizations. So kind of the strategy to talk about staying true to the brand, but having the different voices to the different audiences.
Take it from the in audience. The in audience. Why do people go to a certain social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest, whatever it might be? Why do they go? What's the experience they expect? What's the rules of engagement? So you start off from there. If you have a tactic, like Facebook would not have worked at a report launch. It just doesn't work. There's less engagement, it's much more pushing out. You can have some engagement, but you can be flooded with information. It works with Twitter because you can have more and identify who you're talking to much more. So you've got to take it from the in audience. What's the story? Who are you really trying to influence, and what media do they use? What social media tactic do they use to engage with? And is it engagement, a true engagement? Is it just communications are? Or is it reactive where something might be happening and you need to react to? So all of it at the end of the day It's like all of our communications filtered through the end audience. Where are they? How do they want to experience this information? So they set the agenda. We have to filter through to play according to their rules, not our rules.
So I'd agree. I think there's also a lot of experimentation, trying stuff and seeing what happens. I think there's nothing more to put a room of pure people coughing and looking at their shoes in the term of measurement. I think anyone who's in the vast majority are visual. We're not maths professors. Maths being the European word for math. But I think all communicators are now going to have to get comfortable with data, which is a big change for us. It's very good because it makes what we're doing a lot more dependable, but we're going to have to get comfortable with it. And I think looking at that data and analyzing that data and managing the performance of how things are, how people are engaging, what people are reacting to, and being aware of that can help drive decisions. I think the more important investment decision is where you're not going to invest. And so we don't invest in everything. We're not on Pinterest yet. We're looking at it, but we're not investing in it. We're focusing our efforts more on the blog and Twitter and Facebook because it makes more sense for our business right now. So that's just the citizenship of Microsoft. That's not, there's a lot of teams doing social around Microsoft.
The one I'm interested in is Pinterest, mostly because I have no idea what it is. I read a Facebook post from my sister yesterday, and she said it was something to the effect of, goodbye Facebook, I've found a new love, Pinterest. And I'm curious from a communications standpoint, from a company standpoint, what strategies will work in that new environment. I find it fascinating. I have a vague understanding of what it is, but I think it's going to be a very different strategic way to influence messaging around that.
I think Pinterest is a really interesting case because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm watching Twitter all the time. I'm reading news feeds. I find out about the new social media, Black, Rio, whatever it is, months before my wife. It doesn't really care, and she just kind of wants to use the internet for what she needs to do. And she was using Pinterest for like 3 months before it started to bubble up. And this was just unheard of in my world, that she would learn about the social phenomenon 3 months before. And I think that's very interesting in terms of how these new tools are going mainstream. The fact that the Digitality actually had no clue about Pinterest or the numbers it was getting until months after normal people, I use the term normal, like my wife, were using this and getting real value from it. And I'm not with Pinterest the way I'm with Twitter 4 years ago, where I'm like, really? Right. What's that about? But that doesn't mean it's about it.
I've got some funny pictures.
I imagine you do.
I'm working on a strategy to add emails.
Okay.
All right, we have time for one more question here. Judy?
One of the things I think about CSR is, and that was raised, really interesting is when I think about the evolution of communications field, there was at one point a whole discussion about when you reach a point where you have ethical questions or you reach an absolute kind of awareness of what your values are, because after all, you're facing values all the time. And those values actually end up being really not the values of the clients or the organizations you represent. I don't see that issue bubbling yet in this area, but yet I think it's very possible that this can happen. And Henk, you said that you have fun at what you do, and you do it because you love doing it. And I have the sense that, if it came to that, you know who you are, you know, you just walk out, and if you had to. But I wonder about that issue. Have you started to think about those kinds of things and what being involved in corporate social responsibility, being a spokesperson for the company, the other issue for the company, I think, which is the second part of this, is if you really do the job that you're doing, you have a role that really is a unifying role around values, because you can't just say, well, all these people are doing all this great stuff. You have to say, why are they doing all this great stuff, and how do we unify that? So you've got, I see two huge challenges. One is examining values as this thing evolves, and also your role in a corporation to be an advocate for unifying and unearthing the values that have to be part of CSR. Comment?
You can go first. So I think it's a great question. I think my colleague Dan Ross says that two things. He says CSR is a journey, not a destination. And so we're always learning and it's always changing. He also says that CSR is a horizontal function in a vertical world. So in Microsoft, groups are focused on different things. Our job is to try and get them to think about those things. I think it's a great point about the values. So our CSR absolutely is based on the company values. That's our starting point. And every employee, when they join, is made very clear, here are the values of the company. This is what we stand for. This is consistent to every employee, 19,000 around the world, they all know that. And that's what we start as the basis of our CSR. And the second thing is, when you start getting into those more difficult areas, you need to develop a set of principles. And that gives you somewhere to refer back to when you're trying to make a decision on a position on A, B, or C. What are the principles we take to addressing these problems? But it's a difficult problem. It's like social. There's no necessarily right or wrong answer. And you won't find out if you've done it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Life is great. It's hardly ever black and white. There are certain things that you can say, look, that is just not good. And there's no way we can talk about that and actually talk about sustainability if that's what you're involved with. That's the consequence of your business. I think that what we've seen over the last few years is a big shift in CSR. There used to be a lot around philanthropy. We've seen it really bring it back to the business. What's your impact of the business? Now we move into what's the opportunity. So not just the bottom line, but also the top line. I used to have a line, I don't use it that much anymore because in all fairness, how you feel about it is still important. I used to have a line, and I still believe in it somewhat, is that I don't actually care how. Because a lot of times companies will tell me, this is part of my DNA. This makes my company feel good. And I go, I don't actually care how much you feel. I care about how it makes your business perform. Because I believe that this is the right way to do business. Because if companies tell me the most important thing for me as a company is return on investment, I go, so now you tell me why I should invest in your company. Because if your judgment is I should invest in your company because of return on investment, I'm going to invest in only the company who gives me the best return on investment, and I bet you it's not your company. That's the bottom line. If they want to play hard, that's the truth. There's only one company who knows who it is today, but there's only one company in the world that will give you the best return on investment on any given day. So why should I invest in your company? Tell me the meaning of your company. Why you are going to give me a return today, 6 months, 10 years, 20 years from now. Because the minute we go there, we start talking about who are you as a company, what's your values, how do you see the future? We're talking about your sustainability as a company in a changing world. It brings it back to the business. How it makes the company feel, I don't care. It's good if it makes people feel good, but that's an unintentional consequence of just doing the business in the right way. It's a good consequence, but it's not why we do it.
I think there's also an issue of scale. I think that as a company grows and becomes larger, it's more difficult to have the organizational values communicated. The broader it gets. And the question of ethics are always about personal decisions, individual decisions that individuals make. And good people make bad decisions. And it is going to happen in companies, as Walmart has found out in the last month or so, that people made decisions throughout the chain that have significantly affected them and will continue to affect them down the road. They lost $100 million in value in that company in one day because of when that broke. And they're going to continue to the fines, I think, around that are going to be significant. It was bad decisions, bad ethical decisions made by a person. Are those part of Walmart's values? I don't know. I would guess that that's not what they're going to communicate. So I think there's an issue of scale to consider in terms of the nature of a company and the decisions that they're making. I think it's much easier for a small restaurant with 50 people to talk about and contain the values and the messages and their ethical decisions than it is for a global corporation.
That's great. All right.